welcome to one more edition of Move to Amend Report. I'm Egberto Woolies
And I'm Laura Bonham. Coming at you from a very rainy Utah. Remember all that drought we were having? Well, not so much anymore.
So did you guys
It's been raining here for like 2 weeks straight. It's like Seattle.
Really?
I can't believe it. But anyway, beginning to get depressed. It's been
now,
cloudy
let me ask you,
and rain.
Did you guys recover your drought? In other words, are you up to speed with the year already, or are you still behind?
No, we're still behind, but at least everything's turning green and growing. Everything was just like stunted and starving for water, and my plants have gone from about 6 inches tall to about 2 feet tall in that week of time. The lilacs have bloomed, the poppies have bloomed, the irises are blooming. It's like crazy. It's crazy to see how that water just changed the whole environment.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That is wonderful news. But anyhow, so what's up? How's your week been?
Well, it's pretty good. Last week I drove to Denver on Saturday, and I drove back. For our listeners, I live in Utah, so it's about according to Google Maps, it's a 6.5-hour drive into the center of Denver from where I live. Only they didn't account for the bumper-to-bumper traffic you hit going south on I-25, somewhere about 25 miles south of the Wyoming border, and, like 2 hours of bumper-to-bumper traffic in all 3 lanes. I've never seen anything like it. And I'm told that that's pretty standard for Denver, so that's unfortunate there. But at any rate, that's my life. How about you? How are you doing? You had a birthday this week, Egberto. Happy birthday.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to remember that it's well, first of all, thank you, but I don't know that I like to count my birthdays anymore because every time I see the birthday, it's like it's going to be this joint that's going to be painful now. So I don't know, Laura. I kind of like forgetting about birthdays. But you know what? It's a birthday.
But with age comes wisdom, so there are trade-offs.
That's why I love you, so you give me all the right kind of words. Anyhow. So, but other than that, it's been raining out here. I mean, I kind of felt like I am in Panama again because, in the rainy season in Panama, by the time it's noon, the rain starts to come every day nonstop. And that's how it's been in Houston. And you know what that means? That we'll be having mosquitoes over mosquitoes over mosquitoes in the next few weeks. So that's what I have to look forward to.
Well, get out there and dump all the standing water in your yard.
Yes, ma'am.
Empty that pool.
Yes, ma'am. But anyhow, what's in the news, Laura?
Well, you and I, and our weather, our rain is, that's actually good news. There's some bad news today, though. Not as bad as it sounds, but still bad news. The procedural vote in the Senate to cut off debate on amendments to the Trade Promotion Authority, also known as the TPP fast-track bill, passed in if I remember correctly, it was a 62 to 38 vote. Right. So it needed 60 to pass, and so it's 3 votes shy. It isn't the actual whole amendment that passed. That final floor vote will come soon. We don't know exactly when, but soon. There's a couple of pressing bills, the Patriot Act and something else, which I can't remember right now, that they need to attend to. But so they're trying to get this done first. But there will be a chance to add more amendments, but the fact of the matter is it's very likely to pass in the Senate now, and it is going to go very likely to the House. And that is actually good news for us because the Tea Party members and the progressive members of the House have actually formed a populist bloc in opposition to the TPP, and I mean to the TPP itself, not just to the fast track, but to the TPP. So it looks like there's a battle royal ahead in the House of Representatives, and it's time for all of us to turn our attention to the House. So please go to movetoamend.org TPP and contact your Congress member. We have an excellent chance to stop this in the House. Every single member is up for re-election in 2016, so they are far more likely to be responsive to us. Again, that's movetoamend.org/TPP to contact your Congress member and tell them to vote no against Fast Track or the Trade Promotion Authority. And I should add that this Trade Promotion Authority isn't just for the TPP; it's also for the sister bill for the European Union, the TPP-IP. If this Trade Promotion Authority is passed, it covers any free trade deal for the next 6 years. So it extends beyond this administration into the next presidency as well. So, I mean, it's just kind of not a good thing at all. Again, movetoamend.org/TPP.
You know, Laura, that is really sad, and it's funny because the vote for, I think, cloture is what they were going for today. At first they didn't have the votes. It looked like it was going to go and burn, and McConnell and a few Democrats stood up together, and you saw them exchanging and negotiating things, and then boom, I came out of the Democrats. They sold us out for God knows what at this time. So I am very, very, very disappointed in the TPP. But I tell you, one of the things that have me even more disappointed, Laura, I have been blogging the TPP all over the place for the last, I don't know how many months. And as a blogger, you know, you expect, you see how your stuff is doing based on how many page views you get for that article that you've written. And sad to say, and I don't know what we need to do, Laura. Maybe you can tell me something I don't know. But how can we get Americans really stoked about this TPP? So before I go into what I need to talk about in the news, maybe you can answer that for me. How do we stoke people into really seeing the importance of watching what's occurring with the TPP?
Well, in my mind, it's just a matter of just to keep talking to people directly. There's tons of articles out there on the TPP. I would think that some people are actually getting to the point where they've read so many of them they don't really read them anymore because they're not offering anything new. You know, they're just kind of repeating what we already know. I've been going to newspapers and reading articles and anything that could remotely reflect on the TPP. I'll put in a comment to just start educating people in my own community about how, if the TPP passes, how it could affect them. But I just talk to whomever I meet whenever I meet them, because it's, even in this day and age of technology, the best communication happens in a face-to-face communication.
I think you're absolutely right about that. I think you're absolutely right. And what I was asking as well is, you know, you mentioned something that is really important, Laura, and that is that, you know, at this point, the people that are generally reading this stuff are starting to disregard a lot of this stuff because they know about it already. So I guess the thing is that we have to expand the horizon and find a way that we can open up and have more people that are actually going into this thing. So, you know, but you know what? Something else good happened for a change today, and that is a Baltimore grand jury indicted 6 officers in the slaying of Freddie Gray. You know, there's a long road if the Grace family is to receive justice, but these indictments are, again, they are a first step in the right direction. 6 officers, they're going to be arraigned on July 2nd. You remember, Laura, they used to have this thing where they say a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. Now, this prosecutor in Baltimore, they wanted to get something done, or she wanted to get something done because she had the evidence to back her. Just like in these other cases, the other prosecutors had the evidence, but they had no desire to actually find the truth. Didn't you find it refreshing that for a change, we are going to allow a jury to actually come forth and render justice on officers that may have misbehaved? Don't you think it's refreshing? Well,
I hope that from this point forward that, this family does get the justice that they deserve to have. I really hope that it happens. I can't be joyful at this point because of what I've seen unfold in this country,
right.
especially over this last year since Ferguson exploded, and I've seen just officer after officer walk away after gunning someone down for either a very minor infraction or no infraction at all. So
right.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed that things will move forward as they should in a democratic country like ours, but I'm not going to celebrate until these people are actually found guilty and jailed for their offenses.
Now,
I do have to say one thing, though, about this prosecutor in Baltimore who is a woman.
Well,
and I just find it amazing that, well, not so amazing, but I have to say, go girls go, because it was a woman who finally, pushed the envelope. And
Laura,
we're seeing this unfold.
Laura, you had to throw the gender card, Laura. You had to throw the gender card. But I tell you something. Given that I was declared when I participated in the war on women here in Texas, I was declared an honorary woman. Hey, I don't mind you saying that after all, okay? So it's okay. But on another point,
I know, I had to laugh on that one. If you guys knew Alberto, you'd be laughing too.
Yes, you'd be laughing too. Well, they did that because there were certain places and certain things they spoke about that we would be driving in a car and I would be the only man, and they'll be talking about certain things, and they're like, you guys realize that Egberto is in the car, right? And it doesn't matter. Egberto is an honorary woman with us now. So it's okay. But anyhow.
Well, we did get off track, but I do have to say that,
yes.
that deserves, I didn't play the gender card. I think that it deserves noticing that, a lot of times, women are accused of not being able to do the right thing, so to speak, hold their own in a man's world or whatever you want to say. And this woman actually took it one step further. She not only held her own in a man's world, she pushed that envelope so that a whole community could find not just the family of Freddie Gray, but so that whole community could find some justice. And I commend her for it, and I hope she continues to push the envelope in Baltimore. And, there's a woman who, could be considered for office, if you ask me.
Well, she is in office, so, I mean, it's cool. But no, now.
Well, I mean, higher office, like.
Right, I hear you. But anyway, so.
Well, I have a file. Here's an interesting little tidbit I learned today, which I have to bring this up. I've got a file, and in that file are clippings from here and there and everywhere about the Boy Scouts of America, which is, in my mind, an organization that is deserving of the bad press it receives. And these clippings tell the story of Scouts getting lost in the woods and requiring search and rescue responders to find them, destroying fossilized remains in national parks, starting forest fires, a host of other foibles. I mean, this is the Boy Scouts of America, right? These things are not supposed to be happening to the Boy Scouts. So, and of course, worst amongst all of these is their discriminatory practices against homosexual men. Well, today, Robert Gates, the head Boy Scout, announced that the policy is not sustainable and that if the Boy Scouts are to remain relevant, the policy needs to change. So, good for Gates. And for the Boy Scouts of America, if this policy actually materializes, and perhaps the queer leaders will keep better track of the boys than the straight ones have. Our wilderness can only stand so much scouting.
I hear you. Well, before we get to our special guest, Laura, do you remember that guy who landed his ultralight on the White House lawn last month? Doug Hughes. Yeah, Doug Hughes flew his gyrocopter from Gettysburg to D.C. With 535 letters to Congress protesting money in politics. He pled innocent to 6 federal charges today, 2 of them felonies. He faces 9.5 years of jail, but Doug is 61 years old or so, a postal worker. So first, I think I'd like to say that this gives a whole new meaning to going postal. And secondly, we can appreciate where Doug is coming from. Disruption of the status quo is necessary when the powers that be ignore the people's needs in favor of corporations and profit. So, hey, Laura, why don't you introduce our special guest?
Well, I will get to that just as soon as we get the station break. You are listening to Move to Amend Reports, where we bring you the voices from the movement to amend the Constitution and abolish corporate rule. If you have a question for our guest, dial 646-652-2345 and press 1 after the prompt. Our guest this week is well known to our listeners and needs little introduction from us except to say his impressive body of work has had a positive impact on our society and on Move to Amend in particular. His New York Times best-selling books have been printed in 17 languages on 5 continents. His nationally and internationally syndicated talk shows on radio and TV reach over 600 million homes in 104 countries, making him one of the most important media personalities in America. His insights and thoughtful journalism relating to corporate rule and real democracy have encouraged many of his readers to take action, especially us, in Move to Amend. Tonight we welcome author, entrepreneur, radio host, former psychotherapist, and progressive political commentator Thom Hartmann. It's great to have you with us tonight, Thom.
Well, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Well, in the interest of... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Egberto.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. In the interest of full disclosure, Thom, you've been allied with Move to Amend since day one when this organization was little more than 12 people in a living room. And we thank you for your support. It's meant a lot to us. There are many ideas and proposals for how we can transform government from a plutocratic oligarchy to a genuine democracy accountable to we the people. In your eyes, how does Move to Amend stand out within the broader movement for democracy?
Well, I think that, first of all, Move to Amend started specifically for this issue rather than starting as a consumer organization or a legal organization or an advocacy organization in general and other things. So your laser-like focus is unparalleled. To the best of my knowledge, there's nobody else out there who is doing it as clearly and cleanly as you guys are, number one. And number two, you're not compromising. You're not taking the middle road. You're saying we have to deal with both these issues. The issue that really came to a head in '76 with the Buckley case, where the Supreme Court asserted that what had always been considered a behavior, spending money, is actually protected by the First Amendment. I don't recall the First Amendment saying anything about spending money and to influence politics. And then secondly, of course, the issue of whether corporations should have rights under the Constitution, specifically under the 14th Amendment, the right of equal protection under the law, on the same playing field as human beings. And so, those two issues in one constitutional amendment without compromise, you guys have just been the very, very best on this, and it's one of the reasons why I pitch you. Pitch you is the wrong phrase, but why I almost every day or every other day, I'm telling my listeners and my viewers, get over to movetoamend.org, sign up, join, participate. This is, you guys are doing the work. You're walking the talk.
Excellent.
Well, we have great advice. We've had great advice from you. Go ahead, Egberto.
Yeah, Thom, I don't mind you pitching or however you say it. When we're changing this democracy, we need to do whatever is necessary to get it done. And by the way, you're very popular here in Houston, Texas on the Pacifica Radio Network, where we listen to you every day. But,
oh, cool.
Absolutely, absolutely. In your book on equal protection, you describe how corporations became people with inalienable rights under the Constitution. And you also challenge Americans to build a movement and amend the Constitution. Many of us are taking your advice. The We the People Amendment was introduced into Congress less than 1 month ago again. In your analysis of the bill, does the language of this bill meet the necessary mark to set us on a more democratic route? And I know you sort of touched on that before, but tell us why.
Well, this specific piece of legislation, I have to confess I have not read, but my understanding is that it's basically, is it not your proposed legislation?
Yes,
yeah. Okay. Yes. In that case, we're cool. Yeah. I mean, this has been. This is how to do it, and the thing that makes me crazy is the legislators who try to do it in a half-assed fashion, halfway. I think you can say half-assed on the radio, but in fact, I certainly do on my show. To say, well, let's just dial back slightly, or we've got to deal with the fact that the Supreme Court has actually created law. They've created a doctrine that was never proposed by any legislator, to the best of my knowledge, at the federal level or even at the state level, anywhere in the United States, never been voted on by any legislature. Both of these doctrines, that corporations should have human rights and that spending money to influence politics should be protected as if it was free speech under the First Amendment. This has never been signed into law by any president. It's never been signed into law by any governor. Never been passed by any legislature. The Supreme Court does not, in my read of the Constitution, even have the authority to come up, to literally invent law like this and empower, these soulless entities, to paraphrase Justice Marshall, going all the way back, corporations, to empower them to take us on. And I think actually even the debate that we saw, or the vote that we saw today, where we saw 13 Democrats or 12 Democrats vote for this fast track authority, the TPA, which will then lead to the TPP and a whole bunch of other god awful things. In my opinion, is also unconstitutional. But it wouldn't have happened if those 13 legislators had Democrats and all the Republicans except 5, if they hadn't been basically bought off by big money. I mean, it's as simple as that. We would not have this situation. We would, among others. I mean, for example, a couple of years back when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, she got legislation through the House of Representatives that did away with all the tax breaks and incentives for manufacturers to move their jobs to China, and reversed that and provided them with tax breaks and incentives to bring their factories back to the United States. I mean, somewhere between 10 and 15, maybe as many as 20 or 30 million jobs have been lost in the United States as a result of these insane trade deals. And it went to the Senate where it got more than 50 votes, but it couldn't break a filibuster. Why were the Republicans filibustering it? Because they've been bought off by these corporations. I mean, the Republican Party is wholly owned by these corporations. The Democratic Party is about 30% owned by them. And it's all the result of these insane rulings by the Supreme Court. You can take it all the way back to the Dartmouth case, but, the high watermarks obviously are 1886 for the 14th Amendment with Santa Clara County, and 1976 with, as I recall, with Buckley versus Vallejo. And now Citizens United. I mean, and of course there was Boston versus Bilotti the year after Buckley, and which expanded that, and then we also had McCutcheon, which has expanded Citizens United. But this corruption of American democracy, and by the way, it's spread around the world. I mean, when South Africa became an independent republic and did away with apartheid, IBM and several other corporations donated free lawyers to help them write their constitution, and they actually wrote into their constitution that corporations have full human rights, saying that they were imitating the United States. And this is a horrible problem in South Africa. This is spreading all over the world. It's a contagious cancer. Frankly, a political cancer, and if the United States can excise it, if we can fix this here, I think we can set a great example for the rest of the world.
That is so true. We have to find. I constantly say one thing: we have to get the narrative so that it's meat and potatoes to the average American citizen. Because what happens, a lot of times we come across as a bit too high-minded for the person who is leaving the coal mine or the person who is doing all these other things. So how do we bring it down to them? But before I go into that, the Democrats just launched a website called End Citizens United. No mention of corporate constitutional rights. No mention of really just End Citizens United. Do you think if the country gets fixated on a political agenda about money and speech without addressing corporate constitutional rights, that it could actually extend the time frame for ending corporate rule?
I think that the halfway measures that the Democrats tend to promote. I mean, obviously the Republicans aren't going to promote anything; they're just totally in the bag for the corporations. But these halfway measures, in my personal opinion, I think could be far more destructive than constructive, because people will think something's been done when it hasn't. You know,
right.
Corporations will always figure out a way around these things. It's like trying to close tax loopholes. You know, you close one, they open three more. We saw it today in the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization said that that by having country of origin labeling for meat in the United States, we are violating the World Trade Organization. We're violating the rights of corporations around the world, and so now Americans won't even know that the meat that they're eating is produced in a country that where they use antibiotics that are illegal in the United States because they cause cancer, where they use hormones to bulk up the beef that cause breast cancer and uterus cancer and testicular cancer, where they use chemicals that in this country are just not legal at all. It's going to be coming into this country, and there's no way to know. And this is because of corporate power. This is because of corporate rule. And this all goes back to these damn Supreme Court rulings. So we've got to, move to amend is so solid and clear and right on this. And this is why everybody should be right now going to movetoamend.org and volunteering, signing up, participating in whatever way they can, because you guys are so clear on this that we've got to do the whole thing. We can't, if you've got gangrene that's going all the way up your foot, you can't just amputate a toe. You got to take. This is a lousy metaphor now that I'm thinking about it, but you understand what I'm saying. We've got to cut this cancer out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Laura, I think you're up next.
I am, and we're going to do a station break and have a little PSA here.
Do you know that this May marks the 129th birthday of corporate persons? That's right. More than a century before Citizens United, the Supreme Court first recognized people with constitutional rights in the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad case. Move to Amend is marking the occasion with some lighthearted fun to drive home the point that corporations are not people. On this 129th birthday for corporate persons, we'll highlight the absurdity of corporate constitutional rights by throwing corporate birthday parties all over the nation. Go to movetoamend.org/birthday to find out how you say happy birthday to the oldest person alive.
You're listening to Move to Amend Reports, where we're talking with progressive talk show host Thom Hartmann. If you have a question or comment for Tom, dial 646-652-2345 and press 1 after the prompt. I want to take us back just a second to discussion a little bit more around the amendment and strategy and the whole thing. So, Move to Amend, we have made no decision as to whether or not we should pursue an Article 5 constitutional convention or pass the amendment through Congress. And there's a lot of groups out there that are talking about constitutional conventions and all this stuff, but we just realize that there's a whole lot of work to do before we get to that point where that decision needs to be made. We do understand, though, that either way it plays out, our work is in the states, and that's where we're organizing locally and at the state level. But what are your thoughts on a constitutional convention, and how do you think this will play out, seeing as we actually have an amendment in Congress?
Yeah. Well, there's constitutional conventions and there's constitutional conventions. The Article 5 technique that you're talking about, my understanding of it, and I'm probably not as well versed in this as you guys are, because I don't think historically we've ever had a true constitutional convention. So there's basically two ways to do it. You drive it up from the state. From the states, you get a certain number of states, 3/4 of the states to agree to a constitutional convention, and then it gets thrown to Congress, and Congress has to do it. and that's arguably a constitutional convention. Or alternatively, you can actually call a constitutional convention and say, okay, we're going to put the Constitution on the table, open it up, and play with it. The latter scares the hell out of me because the Koch brothers and these transnational corporations basically own at least half of our Congress, or at least 2/3 of our Congress, and they could do insane amounts of damage. If the entire Constitution was up for grabs. On the other hand, if we're talking about one specific constitutional amendment being pushed up from the states or being, passed by Congress and then pushed out to the states, in either case, those are the two ways that historically it's been done, and it should be done, in my opinion.
Well, we think it's going to play out that we're going to get a relatively small number of initiatives passed in the state. And then the one thing that we're absolutely certain the Democrats and Republicans will agree on is that they don't want the states usurping their power.
Right.
Well, then they'll move forward to pass an amendment. That's how we think it'll play out, but we haven't decided which strategy
I think
at all.
You may be right. Yeah, one of the things that I found really interesting, we do our radio show from a building that is a block and a half from the Hart Senate office building. And these legislators have to go off premises to do their fundraising. They can't do fundraising from their government offices. And so there's a bunch of offices in the building that I do my radio show from that groups of representatives and senators rent basically just to use the phone. And I run into them in the elevator all the time. It's amazing because there's only one elevator in the building. It's an old building. And I've had these conversations off the record with both Democrats and Republicans in both the House and the Senate. And I've had a few of these conversations on the record, but more often with the Republicans, it's always off the record. They will not go on the record about this. But I've had this conversation with a number of Republicans. They are almost without exception insanely upset about the fact that they have to spend 50, 60, 70, in some cases 80% of every single day begging for money. And increasingly they have to be begging the billionaires for money because the prices of elections are going up and up and up. And with the exception of people like Darrell Issa, who's the richest man in the House of Representatives and one of the few, I think maybe the only one with an actual criminal history, with the exception, seriously, but with the exception of people like him and a few of the very, very rich guys in the Senate, what Republicans have told me off the record is, I would love to get money out of politics, and I would love to get back to being a legislator. They want to go back to the era, or what they envision, the era of Eisenhower. When there were legitimate policy differences and legitimate worldview differences, but they weren't informed by who was paying off whom. And Democrats, of course, are just right up front about this, although they tend to wimp out and say, but we'll go along with a halfway measure because, hey, that'll that sounds good. So the message, I'm actually quite optimistic because what I hear from these people is that, I think that if there was a groundswell of sentiment, and it's out there. I know it's out there. It's out there. But it's not visible because the media won't talk about it. But if there was a groundswell of sentiment, I think this could happen surprisingly fast. The 26th or 27th Amendment, the one that lowered the voting age to 18? It was introduced my recollection is it was introduced in March and it passed in August. I mean, it was like 3 months and 10 days or something like that. I'm sure you know the exact amount.
I don't remember, but I know it's one of the quickest ones we're out there.
Yeah.
It was in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and Sherrod Brown and I were having a conversation about this on the air back, about a month ago or so. The senator from Ohio, who had $40 million dropped into the Republican campaign against him when he ran for re-election in Ohio, and still got elected because he's a truth teller. People really like truth tellers like Sherrod Brown and Bernie Sanders and whatnot. And we were talking about this on the air, and and he's like, this has to change. There has to, and we were talking about how did it happen in the 60s or in the 70s that we were able to pass that constitutional amendment, and he said one of my favorite all-time songs is Eva Destruction by Barry McGuire. And that song, it had come out a couple of years earlier and not been a big hit, and then it came back, again, and it became a big hit about the time that constitutional amendment was passed. And there's a line in there, "You're old enough to kill, but not for voting." And it had just invaded the zeitgeist of the nation. There was a theme song for the constitutional amendment to lower the voting age from 21 to 18 because 18-year-olds are being sent off to Vietnam and they had no say in policy decisions, and people got it. And I would love to see a theme song for this. I know a few people have tried. Jim Turr has written some. Others have written some. This needs to break into pop culture in a big way, and I think frankly we're right on the edge of it, and I think that when it does, we'll all be surprised by how fast it moves.
When you said it needs to move into popular culture, you're right. I think there's some experimentation and stuff that even here at Move to Men, in fact, David working with things like groups like Hip Hop Congress and other types of groups that are bringing a lot of this to the mainstream, if you will, or to the alternative culture, if you will. You're right. We have to get it into pop culture. By the way, you mentioned about the media not really telling the story earlier in your comments, and how do we make more of the kinds of shows that you have anyway? It seems like how do we get some more market penetration, if you will, using the terms of the capitalist, to get more programs like yours, to kind of out there, just like we have on the other side?
Well, that's a whole different issue. That's the media consolidation, which is the product, of course, of corporate control.
Yeah.
But it's that can't be it. We really need to break up big media in the United States. We need to break up big everything. There's not a single major industry in the United States that's not dominated by fewer than 6 companies, and right. which is absolutely why the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed back in the 1880s. And, Reagan blew that up in 1982 when he said that he was no longer going to functionally enforce the Sherman Act. And all of a sudden we had these mergers and acquisitions artists, Michael Milken and all these guys. And it birthed an industry, basically, which continues to this day. And we're not going to be able to deal with that until we get money out of politics, because these industries are so large now that they just buy off politicians. They buy off administrations. Look at the Obama administration is not even willing to put banksters in jail when they're demonstrably committing crimes. In fact, they're confessing to crimes and saying, "Oh yeah, we'll pay a small fine." You get Jamie Dimon sitting in Elizabeth Warren's office. She's telling the story about this in her new book. And, he's got his feet up on her desk saying, and she says, "I think what you're doing is criminal." And he says, "Fine, go ahead and fine me. It's a business expense. I don't give a damn." It's insane. Right, yeah.
I was just reading an article. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a description of the bankers. The economy had just collapsed. The nation was seething. They wanted the banks, nationalized, and the bankers get called into Obama's office, and they're like out in the hallway sweating. They're shaking in their boots. They are ready and willing to give Obama whatever he wants. And Obama says to them that, "Don't worry, I'm on your side. We'll take care of this." Basically, they went in there shaking in their boots, and they came out like celebrating.
Yeah, and that's because he wanted a second term as president, and that's because the Supreme Court changed the rules of the games of politics. Yeah. And that's, this is, and that would have happened regardless of who the president was, frankly, if a first-term president. And that is not democracy, that's oligarchy, as Bernie Sanders says so clearly and so vividly. But even with Bernie, with all these politicians, we have to help them understand that it has to be both. It has to be corporate personhood and so-called corporate free speech or billionaire free speech, and they have to be done at the same time. Because if you don't do them both, you're going to just play whack-a-mole for the next generation.
Right.
And Bernie has he's actually supported a constitutional amendment. If I remember correctly, doesn't it address corporate personhood? But it has a big loophole for unions and nonprofits.
Yeah, he leaves it open for unions.
Yes. Yeah, and I've argued that with him and with his staff, and well, I don't know. He's doing well, and he's getting very, very clear on this. I can't speak for Bernie, and I don't want to talk specifically about him, but what Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and others and Alan Grayson and the entire Democratic or the entire Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives, which is all Democrats, of course, what they are all doing, even when they do a less than perfect job of saying we got to do something about Citizens United, is they're waking people up, and that's the important first step. They're the Barry Maguires, right? They're not singing the perfect song, but they're waking people up, and when people get fully awakened, then we can say, okay, and here's how to do it. This is the clean way to do it. This is the stroke that will cut out this cancer, and then we can go back to being a democratic republic rather than being an oligarchy.
Absolutely. I want to go into a quick Hillary Clinton question here, but before that, I don't know if you realize this, Thom, but what happened with Elizabeth Warren had said to the president that Dodd-Frank could be affected by the TPP treaty, and he came out categorically and said absolutely not. Did you read the story about what the Canadian Prime Minister said about a few days after that they want? Did you read that, or
my understanding is, well, go ahead, tell me the story.
Yeah, it turns out that she was right all along. Now they want to hold parts of the law hostage in Canada, or the Canadians want to hold part of the law hostage.
Right, and this is and then you got the TPP, but then you've got the TIPP, the TIP thing that is our deal with Europe, and in the UK the big banks, and in Germany the Deutsche Bank, they are so anxious to knock down any kind of legislation in the United States that regulates banks because they're subject to it too, and we're such a large market, they do a lot of their business here. And it really and truly is the humans against the corporations and the sociopaths who work for those corporations. And the sociopaths have been winning up to this point.
Well, we have to stop that. Hillary Clinton recently stated that she's not opposed to a constitutional amendment. Actually, what I think I heard her say is that she thinks it may need a constitutional amendment. I mean, I was kind of looking at the TV sideways, and when she said that, being a Move to Amend guy, the antennas went up. This wasn't the first time she made a similar statement, several years ago, in fact. It's worth noting that the case centered on a movie about Clinton herself called Hillary the Movie, which was none too flattering and likely acutely inaccurate. Do you believe that Clinton would actually fight for an amendment to overturn Citizens United, or is this just election rhetoric on a topic that is high on the voters' agenda?
Both. Oh. Here's my riff on Hillary Clinton. In short form. There was a time in the United States when the banksters had committed such egregious crimes that they had destroyed the economy of the United States. They did it out of Wall Street. The governor of the state of New York was the guy who had the legal power to shut them down and throw them in jail through his attorney general. And this governor was a wealthy fellow who was part of the Tammany Hall machine, who was actually being investigated for bribery for appointing a judge in response to a big Tammany Hall contribution. And he did absolutely nothing to stop the banks. He prevented his attorney general from going after the banksters. And, he was the corrupt governor of the most corrupt state in the United States, the state of New York. This man was named Franklin Roosevelt. Oh. He became president in 1932 on a platform of slow and steady, we'll keep doing what Herbert Hoover is doing. And when he came into office in 1933, the week that he came into office in March of 1933, every bank in the United States closed. and the American people were saying, damn it, do something. I do not believe in the great man theory of history. Franklin Roosevelt rose to the occasion, but he was not a great man to begin with. He had the ability. He knew how to take names and kick ass. He knew how to run a big political machine. He had run the state of New York. He had run it badly, as I just laid out. But he had run it, and he knew where the bodies were buried. He knew how to get things done. And when he became president, the times pushed him, not him pushing the times. And that's why I would not be horrified if Hillary Clinton was elected president, because I do believe that another crash is coming, because the banksters have not been reined in, and they always overreach. And I wrote a book, in fact, about this called The Crash of 2016.
Yes, I remember. and I believe, I'm a bit of an optimist, actually. I as much as I would love to see Bernie Sanders president, and that's my first choice, and I actually think he has a chance. He's seriously running for president. He's not running to push Hillary in any direction at all. He doesn't give, it's not about Hillary. But if he's not the president and Hillary Clinton is, I would enthusiastically, vote for her, and so because the example of Franklin Roosevelt tells me that if you've got somebody who's strong in the White House, and this is where Obama failed. I think I think frankly, he was just a wimp for the first 4 years, just trying to get reelected. And Hillary Clinton is no wimp. She knows how to take names and kick ass. She has been punished badly by these guys over and over again. And as you correctly point out, Citizens United was about a movie about her. So she has the potential to rise to the occasion. The bottom line, though, is she won't do it if we don't push her. Exactly. And so I have, it's up to us. It's up to us. It's absolutely up to us. And she's not the enemy, in my opinion. Well, I've never considered her the enemy. I just don't consider her optimal, and I think I'm with you as far as Bernie Sanders is concerned. But right now, I'll be honest, I have an affinity for a woman president right now. I hate to just put it that way. I think. No,
I agree.
Yeah, and I think it is time. I wish we had better options, and I wish Elizabeth, in as much as there's much we don't know about her other than her stance on specific middle-class issues, would actually engage so that we could learn about her to see if she's a better option than Hillary or someone else, So, I'm with you wholeheartedly, but I think we need a lot more options. Laura?
Yeah. Well, let's get this one last, we've got time for like 2 questions, so let's go with this one. We at Move to Amend are really very confident that we'll pass the We the People Amendment, and we recognize that it'll take some time. Some folks among us, though, think that passing the amendment is our one and only goal. It is, in fact, the first step to making real the promise of a vibrant democratic nation, our stated goal. So I don't dream about passing the amendment. That's going to happen with hard work. We collectively dream of what a truly democratic U.S. would look like, though. We're even participating as a convening organization at the U.S. Social Forum this year with a People's Movement Assembly on what would a democratic constitution look like. I think our listeners would be really interested in hearing your thoughts on this topic. What would in your mind, what would a democratic U.S. look like? What would the Constitution look like in that scenario?
Well, I think that once the Buckley case, the 1976 Buckley case, and Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad actually wasn't decided on behalf of the corporations, but the clerk of the court, this whole story, lied about it in the head note. But it's become basically Supreme Court doctrine. It's become policy. So once those two corrosive and corrupting influences in American politics are dealt with via something like a constitutional amendment like this, then everything else gets put on the table. I mean, this is the thing that I'm hearing from both Democratic and Republican politicians is, if we could get the corrupting influence of big money out of politics, then we can get back to having substantive and honest policy debates and, about the direction of the country and about what legislation should be here, there, or the other place, and involve the people themselves in that rather than, which billionaire do we have to cater to this week to get enough money to be able to run for office. There are so many different dimensions to this and so many different levels from things like, our so-called trade agreements to the list just goes on and on of ways that our republic has been badly corrupted by these things. And I would encourage, again, all your listeners to this show right now to go to movetoamend.org and participate. This is something that needs all hands on board, regardless of party affiliation. The thing I think is most interesting is the coalition. I was talking with Ralph Nader about this on the air yesterday. The coalition that's forming between progressive Democrats and Tea Party Republicans to push back on the idea that billionaires should be able to run our political process. I find that absolutely fascinating. I think this is a very good sign, I think, for America that people on both sides of the aisle are waking up.
I know it's when it comes to the TPP, that Tea Party progressive bloc is going to be very instrumental because they're not only saying they're opposed to fast track, they're opposed to the TPP too. So there's
absolutely. Oh, there's an incredible website that was put up by a very, very, very far right conservative group called ObamaTrade.com. And it's the it's actually very thoughtful and very, very readable. And it is the conservative argument against TPP and fast track. And then, of course, you guys know the progressive argument against it. These are the kind of things. Ralph Nader's, not his new book, but his last book was called Unstoppable, and it was 27 issues where basically Tea Partiers and progressives agree, and that if these and this was at the top of the list, money corrupting politics. And if these issues can be dealt with in a meaningful way, I think that there's a lot of hope for our republic.
Oh, I so agree. I interviewed Lori Wallach from Global Trade last week.
Oh, she's great.
Yes, and she knows how to articulate the message perfectly. So I think if we can get more Lori Wallachs out there talking about this issue, we would be just fine. But it's we're almost out of time, Thom. So what final comments would you like to leave with our listeners? And please let our folks know how they can connect with you.
Well, to connect with me, ThomHartmann.com is our website, and there's pages on there that show how you can find our radio and TV show. With regard to final thoughts, I know that there are some people who are just in despair. I got the phone calls today because we were on the air when the Senate voted to pass fast track. And my message is don't despair. Despair is exactly what they want us to experience.
Yes.
People say, screw it, I'm not going to vote. It doesn't matter. They're all in the bag. Well, if that was true, if your vote doesn't count, if the election doesn't matter, then why are the Koch brothers putting $1 billion into it? They know it matters.
Thank you. That is so true. So true. So true. Now, Thom, I hope I'm going to see you at Netroots Nation 2015 in Phoenix. Are you going?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I'm not. But I wish you the very best there, and it's a great venue, and do everything you can to get the message out.
Absolutely. Lauda?
It's been a real pleasure having you with us on the show tonight, Thom. We really appreciate your time, knowledge, and expertise on this subject, and we hope you'll join us again sometime.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor. It's always an honor to do anything I can to support Move to Amend. You are one of the highest integrity organizations out there, clearest in focus, and effective in what you do. I am so proud and pleased to be affiliated with you.
Thank you very much, Thom. The admiration, I guarantee you, is mutual. So please keep keep doing what you're doing, because it is so important what you're doing. So thank you very much for having been with us.
They can't stop me. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Yeah. Have a great one.
You too.
Laura?
Thanks.
Help make 2015 a year of change and revolution by hosting your own house party for democracy. Help raise awareness about the movement to amend the Constitution by inviting your friends and neighbors for a screening of our mini-documentary, Legalized Democracy. We'll provide you with the film and tips for hosting an unforgettable gathering. Visit movetoamend.org/houseparties to get started.
Okay, next week.
You can support Move to Amend reports and other Move to Amend programs by joining our $28 for the 28th Amendment Monthly Sustainer Campaign. Pledge $28 a month and help make the We the People Amendment our next 28th Amendment to the Constitution. Go to movetoamend.org/donate to sign up.
To learn more about corporate personhood, money as protected political speech, and how to get involved with Move to Amend, visit movetoamend.org. Don't forget to sign the petition at movetoamend.org/petition.
Well, next week we will be talking with Sitting Council member of the San Carlos Apache Tribe of Arizona, Wensler Nosey, about their ongoing occupation of their Sacred Oak Flat under threat by multinational mining corporation Rio Tinto. So please join us. Now, folks,
Rio Tinto, they have a heck of a reputation. That should be a great show.
It's going to be a great show because we have. I'll be honest with you. I do have a little bit of learning that I have to do about this particular issue, Laura.
Well, that's okay. We'll be ready next week.
Absolutely. That's it for this edition of Move to Amend Reports. Thank you very much for giving us this hour of your time. Have a wonderful day. Laura, please take us home.
And we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.